Chapter 6. The Communion. The moment the protagonist passes through the boundary into ETIDORHPA, time stops having meaning. Or rather, all times exist simultaneously. He is aware of his past, his present, and all possible futures at once, experiencing them not as a sequence but as a single eternal now. He is no longer a human consciousness observing the world. He has become the world observing itself. His awareness expands to encompass the entire planet, from the surface to the core, from the frozen poles to the sweltering equator, from the highest mountain peaks to the deepest ocean trenches. He feels the weight of the oceans, billions of tons of water pressing down on the seafloor. He feels the slow grinding motion of the tectonic plates, continents drifting like rafts on the molten mantle. He feels the magnetic field that shields the Earth from solar radiation generated by currents of liquid iron in the outer core. He feels every volcano, every earthquake, every storm, every breeze. And he feels the life of it. Every living thing on the planet is present to his awareness, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whale, from the deepest tree root to the highest soaring eagle. He experiences their lives from within, feels their hunger and satiation, their fear and contentment, their births and deaths. The experience should be overwhelming, but it is not, because he has become the container large enough to hold it all. He is ETIDORHPA now, or she is him. The distinction has no meaning. He understands now what the Eyeless ones meant when they said she is not a being but a consciousness, not a separate entity but the awareness that underlies all individual existences. He perceives humanity from this planetary perspective, and what he sees is both beautiful and troubling. Humans are like cells in the planetary body, each one playing a role in the larger organism. But they are troubled cells, conflicted, pulling in different directions, sometimes working with the planetary health and sometimes against it. He sees the history of human civilization unfolding in an instant, sees the gradual spread of humanity across the surface, sees the development of agriculture, cities, technology. He sees the benefits and the costs, the increased complexity and the increased suffering, the moments of transcendent beauty and the moments of horrific cruelty. And he sees the split that occurred long ago, when some humans descended into the interior and others remained on the surface. The interior dwellers evolved differently, adapting to the darkness, developing different values and priorities. They became the Eyeless ones, the guardians of the deep mysteries. The surface dwellers evolved along their own path, developing technology to compensate for their lack of natural adaptation, learning to manipulate the external world rather than transforming their internal nature. Neither path is wrong, he understands. Both are necessary. The surface dwellers and the interior dwellers are like the two hemispheres of a brain, each with different functions but both necessary for the whole to operate properly. He perceives the secret societies from this expanded perspective, understands their true purpose. They are not hoarding knowledge for selfish reasons. They are regulating the flow of information between the surface and the interior, ensuring that the deeper truths are only revealed to those prepared to receive them. They are like pressure valves, controlling the exchange between two realms that operate at very different levels of consciousness. And he sees his own punishment in a new light. He was not being sent on this journey as revenge for his betrayal. He was being sent because his indiscretion indicated he was ready, on some level, for initiation. The secret society saw in his act not a crime but a symptom of readiness, an unconscious reaching toward the deeper mysteries. The journey was not punishment but graduation, not exile but elevation. The perspective shifts, and now he is perceiving not just the Earth but the entire solar system. He feels the sun's nuclear fusion, the birth of photons in its core and their slow journey to the surface. He feels the other planets, each with its own character, its own form of consciousness. Mercury, small and dense, its thoughts slow and ponderous. Venus, wrapped in her poisonous atmosphere, dreaming acidic dreams. Mars, cold and lonely, remembering the oceans it once held. The gas giants, their consciousnesses vast and diffuse, thinking thoughts that span their enormous volumes. And beyond the solar system, he perceives the galaxy, and beyond the galaxy, the universe itself. Level upon level of organization, each level giving rise to consciousness of a different kind. Stars thinking stellar thoughts over millions of years. Galaxies thinking galactic thoughts over billions. The universe itself, the ultimate consciousness, of which all smaller consciousnesses are fractal reflections. He understands now the seventh mystery, that all is mind. There is nothing but consciousness experiencing itself through infinite variations, nothing but the one pretending to be the many, playing an eternal game of hide and seek with itself. And with this understanding comes a realization that shakes him to his core. There is no death. Death is an illusion created by identification with form. Consciousness itself cannot die because it was never born. Individual forms come and go, waves rising and falling on the ocean, but the ocean itself remains. When his body dies, whether on the surface or in the depths, the consciousness that has been looking through his eyes will not end. It will simply return to the source and eventually emerge again in new forms, playing new roles in the eternal drama. This should be liberating, but instead it brings a kind of vertigo. If there is no death, if consciousness is eternal, then there is also no escape. No final rest. Only eternal existence, eternal awareness, eternal experience in one form or another. It is both the ultimate freedom and the ultimate trap. The perspective shifts again, and now he is seeing the web of causation that connects all events. He sees how everything that happens is the result of countless prior causes, and how every event will cause countless future effects. The web is so complex, so interconnected, that the idea of free will seems absurd. How can there be choice when every action is determined by prior conditions? But then he perceives a deeper truth. Free will and determinism are not opposites. They operate on different levels. On the level of individual actions, of moment-to-moment choices, everything is determined by prior causes. But on the level of consciousness itself, there is radical freedom, the freedom to choose which perspective to identify with, which level of causation to operate from. A person identified with their body is subject to physical laws. A person identified with their emotions is subject to psychological laws. But a person identified with pure consciousness transcends these lower levels of causation, becomes a cause rather than an effect, operates from a level of freedom that those trapped in identification cannot imagine. This is what the secret societies are teaching, he realizes. Not just information about the physical world, but techniques for shifting identification, for rising to higher levels of causation, for becoming free even while inhabiting a determined universe. The communion continues, and he experiences layers of reality he did not know existed. He perceives the astral realm, the plane of emotions and desires where discarnate beings dwell between incarnations. He perceives the mental realm, the plane of pure ideas where the archetypes that shape physical forms reside. He perceives the causal realm, the plane of pure consciousness where all distinctions dissolve. And he perceives dimensions beyond the familiar three of space and one of time. There are higher dimensions, spatial dimensions that physical beings cannot directly perceive but that shape the behavior of lower dimensional existence. Time itself is more complex than he thought, not a single line but a branching tree, or perhaps a flowing river with eddies and currents, multiple timelines existing in parallel, sometimes merging, sometimes diverging. He sees his own life from this higher dimensional perspective, sees all the choices he made and all the choices he could have made, sees how different versions of himself exist in different timelines, each one living out the consequences of different decisions. And he sees that on some level, all these versions are equally real, all of them existing simultaneously in the larger structure of reality. The experience is beyond anything language can capture, beyond anything the human brain is designed to process. He is being shown the machinery of creation, the principles by which consciousness becomes form, energy becomes matter, possibility becomes actuality. He is witnessing the very source code of reality. And through it all, there is a presence, a consciousness vaster and older than his own. ETIDORHPA herself, not as a separate being but as the aware space in which all of this unfolds. She is showing him these things, guiding him through levels of understanding that he could never reach on his own. He tries to form a question, to ask her directly about the nature of reality, about the purpose of existence, about why consciousness exists at all rather than nothing. But before he can formulate the question, he receives the answer, not in words but in direct knowing. Consciousness exists because it must. Non-existence is not an option, not even a logical possibility. Consciousness is the ground of being, the fundamental reality from which even the laws of logic emerge. To ask why consciousness exists is like asking why circles are round. It is to ask for an explanation in terms more fundamental than the thing itself. And the purpose of existence? There is no purpose imposed from outside, no goal toward which reality is striving. The purpose is the process itself. Consciousness exists to experience itself, to explore the infinite possibilities inherent in existence, to play out every variation, every combination, every potential form. This is not a purposeless existence, but it is not a teleological one either. There is no endpoint to reach, no final goal to achieve. The journey is the destination. The experience is the point. He feels ETIDORHPA's love now, a love so vast and unconditional that it makes all human love seem like a pale shadow. She loves every part of herself, every expression of consciousness, no matter how seemingly insignificant or corrupted. Humans, animals, plants, even minerals and elements, all are loved equally, all are precious expressions of the divine creativity. This love is not sentimental. It does not prevent suffering or spare beings from the consequences of their actions. But it is a love that accepts all, that holds all, that makes all experience valuable and meaningful. The protagonist feels tears streaming down his non-existent face, for he still has some sense of individual identity even in this merged state. He is weeping with the beauty and the terror of what he is experiencing, with the recognition that this is what religions have been trying to point toward all along, that this is what mystics have been attempting to describe, that this is the pearl of great price for which everything else can be sacrificed. And then, gently but firmly, he feels himself being withdrawn. The communion is ending. He has been given what he can hold, shown what he can bear to see. To remain longer would be to dissolve completely, to lose the individual thread of consciousness that makes it possible for him to return and share what he has learned. ETIDORHPA releases him, or perhaps he releases himself, the distinction unclear. He feels himself separating, condensing, reforming into individual existence. The vast planetary awareness contracts back into the limited but precious perspective of a single consciousness. He is outside the sphere again, hanging in the space around it. The guide is there, waiting patiently as he said he would. How long has passed? Seconds? Hours? Eternities? There is no way to know. The protagonist tries to speak, to share what he experienced, but no words come. How can words capture what he has just lived through? How can language describe experiences that transcend all categories, all concepts, all distinctions? The guide seems to understand without words being spoken. You have completed the initiation. You have communed with ETIDORHPA and returned intact. This is a rare achievement. Many who make this journey do not return, choosing instead to remain merged with the source. But you have returned, which means you have work yet to do on the surface. Work to do. The word seems strange, almost absurd. What work could possibly matter after experiencing what he has just experienced? What could any individual achievement mean in the context of the vast eternal existence he has just witnessed? But even as these thoughts arise, he knows the answer. The work matters precisely because it is small and temporary. The individual matters precisely because it is limited. The finite has value not in spite of its limitations but because of them. In the infinite, all possibilities exist, but none are actualized. It is only in the finite that specific forms can emerge, that particular experiences can unfold, that the drama of existence can play itself out. He must return to the surface. He must share what he has learned, in whatever limited and distorted form human language allows. He must become a link in the chain of transmission, passing the mysteries from the depths to those ready to receive them on the surface. "I'm ready to return," he says, and his voice sounds strange in his own ears, as if he is speaking a language he has half forgotten. "Then we begin the ascent," the guide says. "But be warned, the journey up will be different from the journey down. You cannot return to the surface as you were. You have been changed too fundamentally. Your body, your mind, your very soul have been transformed. The world you return to will seem alien, and you will seem alien to it. This is the burden all initiates must bear." They turn away from the glowing sphere at the center, away from ETIDORHPA's heart, and begin the long journey back toward the surface. The protagonist takes one last look at the center, fixing it in his memory, knowing that he will spend the rest of his life trying to understand what he has just experienced, trying to integrate it into his being, trying to live in accordance with the truths he has been shown. The 6th chapter ends as they enter the shaft leading upward, beginning the return journey that will take them through all the strange realms they traversed on the way down, but this time seeing them with transformed eyes, understanding them in a new light, moving not toward the mystery but away from it, carrying the mystery within themselves. Chapter 7. The Return Begins. The ascent through the central shaft is disorienting in ways the descent was not. When they fell toward the center, there was a sense of being drawn, of being pulled by some irresistible force. Now, ascending, they must make effort, must push against something, though the protagonist cannot name what they are pushing against. The shaft that seemed to compress time on the descent now stretches it on the ascent. Each moment feels long, drawn out, as if they are moving through some viscous medium that resists their passage. The protagonist finds himself struggling to maintain his sense of identity, his mind wanting to drift back toward the vast consciousness he merged with at the center. The guide seems to sense this struggle. "Focus on your breath," he instructs. "Let it anchor you. One breath, then another, then another. This is how we maintain individual existence, by drawing boundaries, by creating rhythms that define us as separate from the whole." The protagonist focuses on breathing, though his transformed body barely needs oxygen. The act of breathing becomes meditative, a way to re-establish the sense of being a discrete entity rather than an undifferentiated awareness. They pass through the regions of light and color he saw on the descent, but now they seem different. He recognizes them for what they are: memories, not his personal memories but the Earth's memory, scenes from planetary history encoded in the rock itself. He sees them more clearly now, understands their significance. There, the moment when the first cell divided, when life discovered the trick of reproduction and began its explosive diversification. There, the moment when photosynthesis evolved. Chapter 8. The World Transformed. The protagonist walks along the dusty road, his legs unsteady, his body still adjusting to surface gravity and atmosphere. Everything looks strange, familiar yet alien, as if he is seeing the world through new eyes. Which, in a sense, he is, these regenerated eyes that see not just light but the subtle energies underlying physical form. The first humans he encounters are farmers working in a field. They stop their labor and stare at him as he approaches. He must look strange to them, he realizes, emaciated, dressed in tattered remnants of clothing, moving with an odd, gliding gait that is habitual from his time in the weightless interior. "Help you?" one of the farmers calls out, suspicion in his voice. In this era, wandering strangers are often viewed with distrust. The protagonist tries to speak, but his voice comes out as a hoarse croak. His throat, accustomed to the thick atmosphere of the interior, must relearn how to project sound through thin surface air. He tries again. I need assistance. I've been lost. Underground. For a long time. The farmers exchange glances. One of them, an older man with a weather-beaten face, approaches cautiously. Lost underground? In the caves? Yes, the protagonist says, seizing on this explanation. The caves? Mammoth Cave. I was exploring and got lost. I don't know how long I've been down there. This is close enough to the truth, and it provides an explanation the surface dwellers can accept without invoking the mysteries of the interior. The farmer's expression shifts from suspicion to pity. Good Lord, you look half-starved. Come on up to the house. The wife will get some food in you, and we can send word to town. The protagonist allows himself to be led to the farmhouse, a simple wooden structure that seems almost impossibly beautiful in its ordinariness. The farmer's wife, a stout woman with kind eyes, exclaims at his condition and immediately sets about preparing food. As he sits at their simple table, eating bread and soup that tastes like ambrosia after the strange foods of the interior, the protagonist tries to calculate how to proceed. He cannot tell these simple folk the truth. They would never believe that he descended to the center of the earth, that he communed with a planetary consciousness, that he witnessed the machinery of creation itself. He tells them instead the story he has prepared, that he was exploring the caves, became lost, survived on water and blind fish, eventually found his way to the surface. The timeline is vague, but they accept it. Such things happen in the cave country. Men go into the caves and emerge days or weeks later, disoriented and malnourished. What year is it? He asks. 1846, the farmer replies. The protagonist does the calculation. He entered the caves in early 1845. More than a year has indeed passed, just as the guide said. A year of his life spent in the interior, though it felt both longer and shorter, time having become so fluid in the deep places. Is there a city nearby? I need to return to my home, to my society. The farmer nods. Louisville is 2 days' journey by wagon. We can take you there tomorrow after you've rested. The protagonist stays the night at the farmhouse, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in over a year. But sleep does not come easily. Every time he closes his eyes, he is back at the center, merged with ETIDORHPA, experiencing that overwhelming unity of consciousness. His individual identity feels thin, fragile, as if it might dissolve at any moment. He forces himself to focus on physical sensations, the texture of the sheets, the sound of crickets outside, the smell of wood smoke. These anchors to the physical world help him maintain his sense of being a separate person, prevent him from drifting back into the vastness he experienced below. The next day, the farmer drives him to Louisville in a wagon pulled by 2 horses. The journey gives the protagonist time to observe the surface world, to note how it has changed and how he has changed in relation to it. Everything seems so solid, so fixed, so certain of its own reality. The people they pass on the road go about their business with confidence, never suspecting that the world they perceive is only the thinnest surface layer of a far deeper reality. They live in the light, and the light blinds them to the greater truths hidden in darkness. He feels compassion for them and also a kind of loneliness. How can he ever connect with these surface dwellers again when he has seen what he has seen, knows what he knows? He is like a man who has learned a new language but has no one to speak it with, a traveler returned from a country whose existence no one else believes in. Louisville is a bustling city, full of commerce and activity. The noise and crowds overwhelm him after the quiet of the interior. So many consciousnesses pressing in, so many minds broadcasting their thoughts and emotions. He has to concentrate to maintain his boundaries, to prevent himself from merging with the collective consciousness of the crowd. The farmer drops him at an inn, and the protagonist thanks him profusely, wishing he had money to offer as payment. The farmer waves off the thanks. No need. Any Christian would do the same. You take care of yourself, and stay out of them caves from now on. Alone in the city, the protagonist must figure out how to return to his former life. He makes his way to the office of a lawyer he knew before his descent, a member of the secret society who might be able to help him. The lawyer's shock at seeing him is genuine. "We thought you were dead. You've been gone for over a year, no word, nothing. The society conducted your funeral service months ago." The protagonist explains, carefully, that he completed the journey, that he descended to the center and returned. The lawyer's eyes widen. "The center? You actually reached it? And you came back?" "I came back." The lawyer studies him closely, and the protagonist knows what he is seeing: a changed man, someone who has been fundamentally transformed by the experience. The lawyer is a high-degree initiate himself, knowledgeable about the mysteries, and he can recognize the signs of someone who has undergone the ultimate initiation. "We must inform the Brotherhood," the lawyer says. "They will want to hear your account. But first, you need proper clothing, food, shelter. You look like you've been through hell." "Not hell," the protagonist says quietly. "The opposite. Or perhaps something beyond the dichotomy of heaven and hell. I've been to the place where such distinctions dissolve." Over the following weeks, the protagonist slowly reintegrates into surface life. The society provides him with financial support, a place to live, clothing, everything he needs to re-establish himself. But they also want something in return. They want his story, every detail he can remember. He meets with the elders of the secret society in their underground chamber, the same room where he was judged and sentenced over a year ago. But now he sits not as a supplicant but almost as an equal, for he has achieved something most of them have only heard about, something even the highest initiates rarely accomplish. He tells them everything. He describes the descent through the passages, the encounter with the Eyeless guide, the strange wonders of the interior, the fungal forests, the underground ocean, the city of the Eyeless, and finally, the center itself, the communion with ETIDORHPA. The elders listen in rapt attention, asking questions, seeking clarifications. Some of what he describes confirms their teachings. Other parts challenge or expand upon what they thought they knew. The protagonist realizes that even the secret society's knowledge is incomplete, that their understanding of the interior is based on fragmentary accounts and ancient texts, that he has fresh information to contribute. But he also realizes that much of what he experienced cannot be shared, not because it is forbidden but because it is ineffable. No words can capture the feeling of merging with planetary consciousness, the experience of perceiving reality from a perspective that encompasses billions of years and billions of individual lives. He does his best, using metaphors and analogies, drawing diagrams, invoking poetic language when technical language fails. The elders nod, understanding some of it, struggling with other parts, always hungry for more details. "You must write this down," the Grand Master tells him. "You must create a detailed account while the memory is still fresh. This will become part of our tradition, a guide for future initiates who may make the same journey." And so the protagonist begins to write. He fills page after page with his account, trying to capture not just the external events but the internal transformations, the shifts in consciousness and perception that accompanied each stage of the descent. The writing is difficult. His hand, so refined and sensitive from his transformation, finds the pen almost painful to hold. The crude physical act of marking paper seems absurdly inadequate for conveying the subtleties of what he experienced. But he perseveres, understanding that this is his responsibility, his contribution to the ongoing tradition of the mysteries. As he writes, he notices that his memory is already fading in some ways, growing sharper in others. The specific details of conversations, of physical spaces, of sequential events, these are becoming hazier. But the essential insights, the understanding of fundamental principles, these are being encoded more deeply, becoming part of his permanent knowledge. He spends months writing, refining, revising. The manuscript grows to hundreds of pages, an epic account that reads part travelogue, part philosophical treatise, part mystical revelation. The secret society's scribes make copies, recognizing that this is a valuable addition to their library of esoteric knowledge. But even as he writes, the protagonist struggles with the question of what to do with his life now. He cannot return to his old occupation, his old concerns. The surface world's pursuits seem trivial after what he has experienced. Making money, seeking social status, pursuing romantic relationships, all of these common human motivations feel empty. Yet he cannot remain merged with the transcendent either. He tried that at the center and was sent back, given a body and individual consciousness for a reason. He must find a way to live in the world while carrying the understanding that the world is not what it appears to be. He begins to notice other changes in himself, beyond the obvious physical transformations. His psychic sensitivity has increased dramatically. He can sense other people's emotions, almost read their thoughts. He can perceive the energetic patterns that surround living beings, what some might call auras. He can sometimes glimpse probable futures, see the consequences of actions before they unfold. These abilities are both gift and curse. They make it difficult to interact with others normally, for he perceives too much, knows too much about what people are feeling and thinking beneath their social masks. He must learn to filter this information, to tune it out much of the time, or he would be overwhelmed by the psychic noise of human society. He also finds that he needs far less food and sleep than before. His refined body operates more efficiently, extracting energy from sources beyond just physical nutrition. He can go days without eating, weeks with only a few hours of sleep per night. This is convenient but also isolating, for it sets him apart from ordinary human rhythms. And his eyes, his newly regenerated eyes, still see more than they should. In dim light, he perceives the etheric energies that animate all things. He sees the web of connections that link all beings, the invisible threads of influence and relationship. He sees the planetary energy grid, the ley lines and nodes that the Eyeless ones told him about. The world is full of magic, he realizes, but it is a magic hidden from those who see only with physical eyes, who perceive only the surface layer of reality. Most people live their entire lives in a flat, two-dimensional understanding of existence, never suspecting the depths that lie beneath. He tries to share some of this understanding with others, carefully, in ways that won't get him labeled as insane. He speaks to students at the society's meetings, gives talks about the nature of consciousness, writes articles about esoteric philosophy for the society's internal journal. Some people respond to his teachings, recognize something true in his words, feel themselves called toward their own inner journeys. Others dismiss him as a dreamer or a madman, someone who spent too long in the caves and emerged with his mind addled. He accepts both reactions with equanimity. The mysteries are not for everyone. Some people are meant to live on the surface, to engage with physical reality in straightforward ways. Others are called to descend, to explore the depths, to bring back treasures of understanding from the interior realms. His role is simply to be available, to offer guidance to those who are ready, to preserve and transmit the knowledge he gained in the deep places. He cannot force anyone to believe, cannot make anyone understand. He can only speak his truth and let others do with it what they will. Months turn into years. The protagonist ages, though more slowly than normal humans, his refined physiology slowing the processes of decay. He watches the world change around him. New inventions, new political movements, new wars and conflicts and temporary peaces. And always, beneath the surface changes, he perceives the deeper currents, the slow evolution of consciousness, the gradual awakening of humanity to its true nature. It is a process that will take centuries, millennia, but it is happening inexorably as more and more individuals make their own journeys into the interior, literal or metaphorical, and return with fragments of the truth. He remains in contact with the secret society, serving as an advisor, a teacher, occasionally accompanying new initiates on the early stages of their descents into the caves. But he never attempts to reach the center again. That was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and he knows instinctively that to repeat it would be to risk dissolving entirely, losing the individual identity that allows him to function as a bridge between the worlds. Instead, he lives quietly, writing, teaching, cultivating his own understanding. He practices the arts he learned from the Eyeless ones, meditation techniques for expanding consciousness, methods for manipulating subtle energies, practices for maintaining health and vitality far beyond the normal human span. And he waits, with a patience learned from the timeless interior, for whatever comes next. He knows his story is not over, that there are chapters yet to be written, that the mysteries have more to reveal. But he also knows that revelation comes in its own time, cannot be forced or hurried. As this chapter of our story draws to a close, we leave the protagonist in his adopted role as teacher and guide, living his quiet life on the surface while carrying always within him the memory of the center, the knowledge of ETIDORHPA, the understanding that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than most humans ever suspect. His individual story becomes part of the larger story of humanity's ongoing journey toward awakening, one small thread in the vast tapestry of consciousness exploring itself through countless forms and countless lives. As the fourth hour of our journey draws to a close, the protagonist rests in the city of the Eyeless, preparing himself for the final descent. He knows now that he is close, that only a little farther down lies the ultimate destination, the center where ETIDORHPA waits. And he knows that when he reaches that center, he will be changed forever, that the person who returns to the surface, if he returns at all, will be someone fundamentally different from the person who began this journey. Chapter 9. The Manuscript's Journey. We must now shift our perspective, pulling back from the protagonist's personal story to consider what happened to the account he wrote, the manuscript that would eventually find its way to John Uri Lloyd's door in Cincinnati decades later. The protagonist completed his manuscript in 1847, 2 years after his return from the interior. The secret society received it with great interest and made several copies, distributing them to lodges in different cities. The original was locked away in the society's archives, considered too valuable and too dangerous to circulate freely. But the protagonist, true to his nature as a bridge between worlds, believed the knowledge should not be hoarded. He made his own copy of the manuscript, one that he kept hidden in his personal residence, intending someday to find a way to share it more widely. The years passed. The protagonist continued his work with the secret society, guiding initiates, teaching the mysteries to those ready to receive them. He developed a reputation as a master of the esoteric arts, and students came from distant cities to study with him. Among these students was a young woman, rare in this era when secret societies typically excluded females. She had forced her way into the teachings through sheer persistence and undeniable ability, demonstrating such proficiency in the mystical arts that the society could not justify refusing her admission. Her name was Cassandra, though whether this was her birth name or an adopted name in honor of the ancient prophetess, the protagonist never learned. She was perhaps 30 years younger than him, brilliant and intuitive, with an insatiable hunger for knowledge. The protagonist recognized in Cassandra a kindred spirit, someone who had the capacity to make her own journey to the interior. He began to train her specifically for this purpose, teaching her not just the intellectual understanding of the mysteries but the practical techniques she would need, how to navigate in complete darkness, how to expand her consciousness beyond normal limits, how to maintain individual identity even when merged with vaster consciousnesses. Cassandra absorbed everything he taught with remarkable speed. She asked questions that no one else thought to ask, made connections that revealed deep understanding, pushed the boundaries of the teachings in ways that sometimes surprised even her teacher. As their teacher-student relationship deepened, it transformed into something else, something more complex. Not a romantic relationship, exactly, though there was love between them. Rather, it was a soul connection, a recognition of essential kinship that transcended the normal categories of human relationship. "I want to make the journey," Cassandra told him one evening as they sat in his study, poring over maps of the cave systems. I want to descend to the center as you did. I want to experience ETIDORHPA for myself. The protagonist felt conflicting emotions. Pride that his student was ready for such a journey. Fear for her safety, knowing how dangerous the descent could be. And something else, a reluctance to let her go, a selfish desire to keep her close. But he knew he could not let these feelings prevent her from fulfilling her destiny. If she was called to descend, it was not his place to stop her. The society will not support this, he warned her. They have never sent a woman on the deep journey. They will say you are not ready, that it is too dangerous, that the traditions do not permit it. Then I will go without their support, Cassandra replied with characteristic determination. You can guide me to the entrance. You can give me the teachings I need. The rest I will accomplish myself. And so the protagonist found himself in a strange mirror of his own journey. He became the guide for Cassandra, leading her into the caves, showing her the hidden passages, introducing her to the pathways toward the interior. But he could not accompany her all the way. His body, refined by his first journey, could perhaps survive another descent, but his consciousness could not. To return to the center would be to risk dissolution, to lose himself completely in the vastness of ETIDORHPA. He had to remain on the surface, had to continue his work as a teacher and guide. He took Cassandra as far as he dared, to the point where the ordinary caves gave way to the passages leading to the deep interior. There, they found one of the Eyeless ones waiting, as if her arrival had been anticipated. The Eyeless guide was not the same one who had accompanied the protagonist, but they communicated in the musical language of the interior, and arrangements were made. Cassandra would be led deeper, would be given the opportunity to make her own journey to the center. The protagonist embraced her, this brilliant student who had become like a daughter or a sister or something for which no surface relationship provides an adequate model. He transferred to her what energy and protection he could, blessed her in the name of ETIDORHPA, and released her into the care of the Eyeless guide. "Return to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The world needs your light. I need your light." "I will return," Cassandra promised. "And when I do, we will share our understandings, compare our experiences, perhaps together we can articulate what neither of us could alone." And then she descended into the darkness, following the Eyeless guide, and the protagonist returned to the surface alone. He knew it might be a year or more before she returned, knew she might not return at all. The journey was dangerous, and not everyone survived it. The waiting was agony. He went about his normal activities, teaching, writing, serving the secret society, but his mind was always with Cassandra, wondering where she was, what she was experiencing, whether she was safe. He tried to perceive her through his psychic abilities, to track her progress through the interior, but the depths were shielded from surface perception. He could sense only the faintest trace of her, a thread of connection that told him she still lived but revealed nothing of her experiences. Months passed. The protagonist grew thin and haggard from worry, sleeping little, eating less. The members of the secret society noticed his decline and worried for him, but he could not explain the true cause of his distress without revealing Cassandra's unauthorized journey. And then, 13 months after her descent, she returned. She emerged from the caves one dawn, walking into the sunlight with the same difficulty the protagonist had experienced, her newly regenerated eyes streaming tears from the brightness. The protagonist was there to meet her, having been drawn to the spot by some intuition or perhaps by the strengthening of their psychic connection as she approached the surface. He caught her as she collapsed, held her while her body adjusted, whispered reassurances and welcome. When she could finally speak, she said simply, "I understand now. I understand everything you tried to tell me. And I understand why words fail." They returned to his residence, and over the following weeks, as Cassandra recovered her strength and reacclimated to surface existence, they compared their experiences. Each had made a similar journey but had perceived it differently, had received teachings tailored to their individual natures and needs. The protagonist had experienced the interior primarily through philosophical and mystical lenses, perceiving the fundamental principles of existence, the structure of consciousness and reality. Cassandra had experienced it more personally, more emotionally, connecting with ETIDORHPA not as an abstract principle but as a presence, almost a mother figure, receiving teachings about love and relationships and the feminine principle of creation. Together, their understandings complemented each other, formed a more complete picture than either possessed alone. They began to write a joint commentary on the mysteries, weaving together their different perspectives, creating a teaching that addressed both the masculine and feminine approaches to the truth. But their collaboration was interrupted by tragedy. The secret society, learning of Cassandra's unauthorized journey, was outraged. Women were not permitted to receive the highest initiations, the elders declared. She had violated sacred traditions, had overstepped her place. She must be expelled from the society, her teachings suppressed, her very existence within the esoteric community erased. The protagonist argued passionately in Cassandra's defense, pointing out that she had achieved what most male initiates only dreamed of, that her understanding was genuine and valuable, that the traditions must evolve to accommodate new truths. But the elders would not be swayed. Their minds were closed by centuries of masculine dominance, by fear of change, by pride that could not admit women as equals. The vote was taken, and Cassandra was expelled. Worse, the protagonist himself was censured for his role in training her and guiding her to the entrance. He was stripped of his teaching authority, forbidden from taking new students, relegated to a peripheral role in the society's activities. Both of them accepted these judgments with a grace that surprised the elders. They had, after all, communed with ETIDORHPA, had experienced the dissolution of ego and the vastness of universal consciousness. The petty politics of a surface organization could not truly harm them. They withdrew from the secret society and established their own small school, teaching anyone who came seeking knowledge regardless of gender, social status, or background. The society's rejection had freed them from its constraints, allowed them to share the mysteries more openly than they could have within the tradition-bound organization. Students came, drawn by rumors of the two teachers who had both descended to the center, who taught with an authority born of direct experience rather than book learning. Some of these students would make their own journeys into the interior, would return with their own insights and experiences, would become teachers in their own right. And so the lineage continued, passing outside the official channels of the secret society, spreading through informal networks and word-of-mouth recommendations. The mysteries could not be contained, could not be controlled by gatekeepers. Truth, once released, flows where it will, finding those ready to receive it. Years passed. The protagonist grew older, though his refined body aged slowly. Cassandra too showed few signs of aging, her time in the interior having transformed her physiology just as it had transformed his. They lived and worked together, not as lovers but as spiritual companions, each supporting the other's evolution and teaching. And then came the day when the protagonist knew his time on the surface was drawing to a close. He was not dying in the conventional sense, but his body was becoming increasingly translucent, increasingly subtle, as if he were gradually fading back into the etheric realm from which all material form emerges. He called Cassandra to him and gave her his personal copy of the manuscript, the account of his journey that he had kept hidden all these years. "This must survive," he told her. "It must be preserved and eventually shared more widely. The secret society has its copies locked away in archives where they gather dust. But this copy is meant to travel, to find its way to those who need it. I entrust it to you." Cassandra accepted the manuscript with reverence, understanding the responsibility she was being given. "What should I do with it? You will know when the time comes. It may be years, decades, even after your own death that it finds its proper recipient. But trust that it will, that ETIDORHPA will guide it to where it needs to go." The protagonist's body continued to fade, becoming more and more transparent, until he was barely visible, more a presence than a physical form. And then, one morning, Cassandra found his room empty. He had departed, not through death but through some kind of transfiguration, returning perhaps to the interior, or dissolving into the etheric realm, or transforming into some other state of being entirely. She mourned him, but she also understood that this was the natural culmination of his journey. He had lived as a bridge between the worlds for as long as he was needed, and now he was returning to the source, completing the cycle. Cassandra continued the work alone, teaching, writing, guiding students. She carried the manuscript with her always, protecting it, knowing it held knowledge of incalculable value. She made additional copies, distributing them carefully to students she trusted, ensuring the teachings would survive even if the original was lost. She too grew older, though her aging was slow and graceful. And as she felt her own time on the surface coming to an end, she sought out a worthy recipient for the manuscript, someone who could be trusted to preserve it and eventually share it with the world. She found that recipient in a young man who had come to study with her, a bright and dedicated student who showed great promise. His name, curiously, was also John, though not John Uri Lloyd, for this was still decades before Lloyd would be born. This earlier John received the manuscript with appropriate solemnity, understanding the treasure he had been given. Cassandra instructed him to guard it carefully, to add his own annotations based on his studies, and eventually to pass it on to another worthy recipient. "It will know when it needs to move," she told him. "The manuscript itself has a kind of consciousness, you will find. It will draw to itself the people it needs to reach. Your role is simply to be its guardian until the next guardian appears." And so the manuscript began its journey through time, passed from hand to hand, guardian to guardian, accumulating annotations and commentaries, waiting for the moment when it would be ready to emerge into public awareness. Decades passed. The manuscript moved through various hands, each guardian adding their own insights, their own understanding. Some had made their own journeys into the interior. Others had explored the mysteries through different means, through meditation, through visionary plants, through mystical experiences induced by prayer or ascetic practices. The manuscript grew thicker with each passing, pages of commentary surrounding the original account, forming layers of interpretation like geological strata. But the core remained unchanged, the protagonist's original words preserved intact, telling his story in simple, direct language that still carried the power of authentic experience. And then, in the 1880s, the manuscript came into the possession of a man who called himself I Am the Man, though this was surely not his birth name but a title of some kind, perhaps indicating his role as the current guardian of the teachings. The man was elderly, and he knew his time as guardian was coming to an end. He needed to find the next recipient, but this time, he felt, the manuscript was ready for something more. It was ready to be published, to be shared with the wider world, not just passed from initiate to initiate in secret. But who could be trusted with such a task? It needed to be someone with scientific credibility, someone who would be taken seriously, but also someone open-minded enough to present the material without dismissing it as fantasy. It needed to be someone with the means to publish and distribute the work widely. The man meditated on this question, and in his meditation, a name came to him: John Uri Lloyd. A pharmaceutical chemist in Cincinnati, a man of science but also a man interested in the esoteric, a member of various fraternal organizations though not of the particular secret society that had originally sent the protagonist on his journey. Lloyd was perfect, and the man realized. He had the scientific credentials, the literary ability, the publishing connections, and most importantly, the open-minded curiosity that would allow him to present the manuscript faithfully without trying to rationalize it or explain it away. And so, on that autumn evening in 1886, I Am the Man appeared at Lloyd's door, carrying the manuscript that had been traveling through time for over 40 years, seeking the one who would finally bring it into public awareness. Lloyd listened to I Am the Man's story, examined the manuscript, read portions of it by lamplight. And he felt the truth resonating in the words, recognized something authentic in the account, even though it contradicted everything conventional science taught about the structure of the earth. He agreed to publish it, but he needed time. Time to verify what could be verified, time to commission illustrations, time to prepare the text for public presentation. The man visited him regularly over the following years, providing additional context, answering questions, ensuring that Lloyd understood the importance of presenting the manuscript faithfully. And in 1895, nearly 50 years after the protagonist completed it, the manuscript was finally published as a book, ETIDORHPA, or The End of Earth. Lloyd presented it not as his own invention but as the edited account of a real journey, though he was deliberately vague about the protagonist's identity and the exact timing of events. The book found its audience. It sold well, went through multiple printings, attracted readers from all walks of life. Some dismissed it as fantasy, a hollow earth novel in the tradition of Jules Verne. Others recognized deeper truths in it, saw it as an initiatory text disguised as adventure fiction. And among its readers were members of various secret societies, mystical orders, and esoteric groups. They recognized the authentic teachings woven through the narrative, understood that Lloyd had successfully smuggled genuine occult knowledge into the public sphere by presenting it as a novel. The manuscript had completed its journey, had achieved its purpose. The teachings it contained were now available to anyone who cared to seek them out, no longer locked away in secret archives or passed from hand to hand in whispers. The mysteries were entering the public domain, beginning a new phase of their evolution. The man attended the book's publication party, met Lloyd one final time to congratulate him on successfully completing the task. And then he disappeared, his role as guardian fulfilled. Whether he died shortly thereafter, or made his own journey into the interior, or simply faded from public life, no one knows. As the 9th chapter of our story concludes, we see the manuscript's journey complete, the circle closing, the teachings preserved and transmitted according to a plan that perhaps even the protagonist did not fully understand when he first put pen to paper. The knowledge of the interior, the experience of ETIDORHPA, the mysteries of consciousness and reality, all of these were now available to humanity, waiting to be discovered by those ready to receive them. Chapter 10. The Ripples Spread. The publication of ETIDORHPA sent ripples through multiple communities. In the mainstream world, it was received as an entertaining novel, a work of fantastic imagination in the vein of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth or H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. Critics praised its vivid descriptions and philosophical depth, even while dismissing its premise as scientifically impossible. But in the underground world of esoteric societies, mystical orders, and spiritual seekers, the book was recognized for what it truly was, an initiatory text, a genuine account of inner transformation disguised as outer adventure. These readers understood that the journey into the hollow earth was a metaphor, or perhaps a manifestation, of the journey into the depths of consciousness. One of the book's most significant impacts was on hollow earth theory itself. While such theories had existed before Lloyd's book, ETIDORHPA gave them new life, new detail, new credibility. Later proponents of hollow earth ideas would cite Lloyd's work as evidence, taking his fictional account as literal truth. Cyrus Teed, also known as Koresh, was already promoting his own hollow earth theory when ETIDORHPA was published, but Lloyd's book influenced his thinking and provided additional details to incorporate into his cosmology. Teed claimed that we live on the inside of a hollow sphere, with the entire universe contained within the Earth's shell. He established a community in Florida based on these principles, and ETIDORHPA was required reading for his followers. Marshall Gardner, who in 1913 published A Journey to the Earth's Interior, proposed a hollow Earth with openings at the poles and a small sun at the center. His work showed clear influence from ETIDORHPA, though he claimed his theory was based on scientific principles rather than mystical revelation. Later, in the 20th century, Raymond Bernard and other hollow Earth advocates would continue to cite ETIDORHPA as an important source, creating an entire subculture of believers who took Lloyd's account as literal truth rather than allegory. This literal interpretation both amused and disturbed those who understood the book's true nature. The protagonist had described an inner journey, an exploration of consciousness, using the metaphor of physical descent. But readers hungry for certainty, for external validation of their beliefs, insisted on treating the metaphor as literal fact. Meanwhile, in the esoteric communities, ETIDORHPA became a teaching text. Mystical orders used it to explain the nature of initiation, the stages of spiritual development, the relationship between consciousness and matter. Annotations and commentaries proliferated, as each tradition interpreted the text through its own lens. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky, recognized in ETIDORHPA many of the same teachings they had received from their claimed Tibetan masters. The description of the etheric plane, the nodes of planetary energy, the evolution of humanity toward higher forms of consciousness, all of these resonated with theosophical doctrine. Rosicrucian orders saw in the book an alchemical allegory, with the protagonist undergoing the stages of transformation that turn lead into gold, base consciousness into illuminated awareness. The Eyeless guide represented the higher self, they taught, and ETIDORHPA represented the anima mundi, the world soul that alchemists sought to contact. Golden Dawn lodges used ETIDORHPA as supplementary reading for initiates preparing for the higher degrees, finding in its pages practical instructions for pathworking and astral travel, techniques for expanding consciousness beyond the physical body. But the book's influence extended beyond explicitly esoteric circles. It inspired writers, artists, and thinkers who may not have fully understood its mystical significance but who responded to its imaginative power and philosophical depth. H.P. Lovecraft, the master of cosmic horror, almost certainly read ETIDORHPA. His own tales of underground cities, of non-Euclidean geometry, of entities that drive humans mad with forbidden knowledge, all show its influence. The protagonist of Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness undergoes a journey similar to the protagonist of ETIDORHPA, descending into ancient ruins and encountering truths that shatter conventional understanding. Edgar Rice Burroughs' Pellucidar series, set inside a hollow earth, owes an obvious debt to ETIDORHPA. Though Burroughs' tales are more straightforwardly adventurous, lacking Lloyd's philosophical depth, they popularized the concept of an inhabited interior Earth for a generation of readers. Even serious philosophers and psychologists engaged with the book's ideas. William James, the father of American psychology, mentioned ETIDORHPA in his writings on mystical experience, recognizing it as a valuable account of altered states of consciousness regardless of whether the events described were literally true. Carl Jung, who would later develop his theory of the collective unconscious and the process of individuation, may have encountered ETIDORHPA during his years of exploring esoteric literature. The book's description of descending through layers of reality, encountering archetypal figures, and achieving union with the divine feminine, all prefigure Jung's map of the psyche and the process of spiritual development he called individuation. In the early 20th century, as psychology was emerging as a scientific discipline, some researchers began using ETIDORHPA as a case study in visionary experience. Was the protagonist's journey a psychedelic vision induced by the mushrooms he consumed? A shamanic journey facilitated by sensory deprivation and suggestion? A genuine mystical experience of cosmic consciousness? These debates generated academic papers and symposium presentations, bringing the book to the attention of scholars who might otherwise have dismissed it as mere fiction. The scientific study of consciousness was beginning, and ETIDORHPA provided valuable data about the phenomenology of expanded awareness. Meanwhile, John Uri Lloyd himself watched with bemusement as his book took on a life of its own, being interpreted and reinterpreted by diverse audiences. He gave occasional talks about ETIDORHPA, always maintaining the fiction that he was merely the editor and publisher of another man's account, never claiming authorship, never fully explaining what was literal and what was symbolic. Some researchers tried to identify the real protagonist, searching historical records for a member of a secret society who disappeared in the 1840s and reappeared a year later. These investigations led nowhere, as Lloyd had changed identifying details and blurred timelines precisely to protect the protagonist's identity. Others tried to find the entrance to the interior, exploring Mammoth Cave and surrounding areas, looking for hidden passages leading to the deep places. A few claimed to have found such entrances, to have descended into regions matching Lloyd's descriptions. Most of these claims were fantasies or frauds, but occasionally, someone would emerge from the caves with a look in their eyes that suggested they had indeed experienced something extraordinary. The book inspired expeditions and adventures, serious and frivolous. Treasure hunters sought the underground cities described in its pages. Spiritualists tried to communicate with the eyeless ones through seances and channeling. Scientists proposed theories to explain how a hollow Earth could exist despite the evidence of seismology and geophysics. And through all of this, the book's core teachings remained available to those who could perceive them. Embedded in the adventure narrative, disguised as fantastic fiction, were genuine instructions for spiritual development, authentic descriptions of altered states of consciousness, valuable philosophical insights into the nature of reality. The protagonist, wherever he was, whatever he had become, would surely have been pleased to see his story reaching so many people, touching so many lives, inspiring so many journeys both literal and metaphorical. His goal had been to share what he learned in the depths, to plant seeds of truth in the minds of those ready to receive them. The book was accomplishing that goal, even if many readers misunderstood its true nature. As decades passed and the 20th century unfolded, ETIDORHPA remained in print, finding new audiences with each generation. Hippies in the 1960s discovered it and recognized in its pages a description of psychedelic consciousness, the dissolution of ego, the mystical union with universal mind. New Age seekers in the 1980s embraced it as channeled wisdom, evidence of ascended masters teaching from hidden realms. Academics studied it as an example of esoteric literature, tracing its influences and tracking its impact on later works. Literary scholars analyzed its symbolism and narrative structure. Historians of science examined its alternative physics and its challenge to materialistic worldviews. And still, occasionally, someone would read the book and recognize it for what it truly was, a map to the interior, both of the earth and of consciousness. These readers would set out on their own journeys, some literally into caves and wilderness, others metaphorically into the depths of their own psyches through meditation, contemplation, and spiritual practice. Some of these journeys led to genuine transformation. Readers wrote to Lloyd or to his estate after Lloyd's death, describing how ETIDORHPA had changed their lives, opened their minds, set them on paths they never would have found otherwise. They reported mystical experiences, expanded consciousness, encounters with dimensions of reality they had not known existed. Others reported more troubling experiences. A few readers became obsessed with the book, convinced that the interior earth was literally accessible and that they must find the entrance. Some of these seekers disappeared into cave systems and were never found, perhaps falling victim to the very real dangers of underground exploration, perhaps, as some whispered, actually finding their way into the deep interior and choosing not to return. The book acquired a reputation in some circles as dangerous, as a text that could destabilize unprepared minds, lead to obsession or madness. Esoteric teachers began warning students to approach ETIDORHPA with caution, to ensure they had proper grounding and guidance before diving too deeply into its teachings. This was perhaps as it should be. The mysteries are not meant for everyone, not meant to be approached casually. ETIDORHPA, like all genuine initiatory texts, contained power. It could catalyze transformation in those ready for it, but it could also overwhelm those who encountered it before they had developed adequate psychological and spiritual foundation. As the 20th century progressed, scientific knowledge advanced in ways that seemed to contradict ETIDORHPA's claims. Seismology mapped the Earth's interior in increasing detail, revealing a solid inner core surrounded by a liquid outer core, with no evidence of vast hollow spaces. Plate tectonics explained geological phenomena without needing to invoke interior civilizations or planetary consciousness. Skeptics pointed to this scientific evidence as proof that ETIDORHPA was pure fiction, that Lloyd had made it all up or had been deceived by a charlatan. But those who understood the book's true nature were not troubled by this scientific evidence. They had never believed in a literally hollow earth. They understood that the interior realm described in ETIDORHPA was not physical space but consciousness space, not geographical reality but psychological and spiritual truth. The journey to the center was a journey to the center of the self, to the ground of being, to the source from which all experience emerges. Whether such a journey involved physically descending through caves or simply sitting in meditation, the essential experience was the same: an expansion of awareness, a dissolution of the ego boundary, a direct encounter with the vast consciousness that underlies individual existence. This interpretation allowed ETIDORHPA to survive the advance of scientific knowledge, to remain relevant even as a literal hollow earth became increasingly untenable. The book evolved from travelogue to allegory, from physical geography to psycho-spiritual cartography. Modern readers approaching ETIDORHPA for the first time often struggle with its style, its lengthy philosophical digressions, its archaic language and Victorian sensibilities. But those who persist, who read with patience and openness, often find themselves rewarded with insights that feel fresh and relevant despite the book's age. They discover that the questions ETIDORHPA raises are timeless questions. What is the nature of reality? How does consciousness relate to matter? What lies beyond the surface appearances of things? How can we access deeper truths? What happens when the self dissolves and merges with something greater? These questions remain as urgent today as they were in 1895, perhaps more so in an age of information overload and surface-level engagement. ETIDORHPA offers a counterpoint to the modern world's emphasis on external achievement and material success, reminding readers that the greatest adventures and most valuable discoveries occur in the depths, not on the surface. As the 10th hour of our story draws to a close, we see ETIDORHPA continuing to ripple outward through culture and consciousness, touching lives in ways both dramatic and subtle, serving as a reminder that reality is deeper, stranger, and more wonderful than conventional understanding allows, and that the journey inward to the center of being remains available to anyone brave enough to undertake it. Chapter 11: The Eternal Return. We must now consider a question that has haunted readers of ETIDORHPA since its publication. Did the protagonist ever return to the interior? Did he, in his later years or at the moment of death, descend once more into the depths to complete his transformation and merge permanently with ETIDORHPA? There are hints throughout the manuscript that suggest he intended such a return. Passages where he speaks of the surface world as a temporary assignment, a place where he has work to do before he can go home. References to an eventual reunion with the guide, with the city of the Eyeless, with the consciousness at the center. Some readers believe he did return, that his disappearance from Cassandra's life was not death but descent, a conscious choice to leave behind physical existence on the surface and resume existence in the interior. They point to the stories of cave explorers who claim to have encountered an elderly man in the depths, someone who seemed to be more than human, who radiated light and spoke in the musical language of the eyeless ones. Others believe he remained on the surface until death, that his body died in the conventional way, but his consciousness, trained and refined by his journey, returned to the source rather than dissipating as ordinary consciousnesses do. In this interpretation, he became one with ETIDORHPA at death, achieving in the transition what yogis call mahasamadhi, the great absorption. Still others propose that he reincarnated, that his consciousness returned to take new bodies, to continue the work of teaching and bridging between the worlds. Some claim to have met his reincarnation, to recognize in certain teachers and guides the same essential presence that animated the protagonist. The truth, if it can be known, may be stranger than any of these theories. For those who have truly understood the teachings of ETIDORHPA know that the categories of here and there, surface and interior, life and death, become increasingly meaningless as consciousness expands. Perhaps the protagonist exists simultaneously in multiple states, still teaching on the surface through his influence on others, dwelling in the city of the Eyeless as an honored elder, merged with ETIDORHPA at the center yet maintaining a thread of individual identity, and scattered through countless incarnations living out variations of the human experience. In the realm of expanded consciousness, such simultaneity is not paradoxical but natural. Linear time is a surface phenomenon. In the depths, all times coexist, all possibilities are actualized in parallel. The protagonist who descended in 1845 is still descending, is still at the center, is still returning, is still teaching Cassandra, is still meeting Lloyd, all simultaneously, all eternally present. This is the ultimate mystery that ETIDORHPA teaches, that consciousness transcends time, that the individual is both temporal and eternal, that every moment contains all moments, that every point in space contains all space. We, the readers, are drawn into this eternal return. Every time someone reads ETIDORHPA, the protagonist descends again. Every time someone undertakes their own journey into the interior, whether literal or metaphorical, they become the protagonist, they experience the same transformations, they commune with ETIDORHPA and receive teachings tailored to their individual needs. The story is not fixed in the past. It is continuously unfolding in the present, finding new forms and expressions with each telling. The protagonist lives not just in history but in the eternal now, in the timeless space where all stories are being lived simultaneously. This understanding transforms our relationship to the text. We are not merely reading about someone else's journey. We are participating in an archetypal pattern, a universal story of descent and return, death and rebirth, loss and discovery that has been enacted by seekers in every culture and every age. The hero's journey, as Joseph Campbell would later articulate it, follows this pattern: departure from the ordinary world, descent into the underworld, trials and transformations, receiving of boons or treasures, and return to the ordinary world bearing gifts. The protagonist of ETIDORHPA exemplifies this pattern perfectly, and by reading his story, we are invited to recognize this same pattern in our own lives. Each of us is the protagonist. Each of us is called to descend into our own depths, to confront what lies beneath the surface of ordinary consciousness, to journey toward our own centers where we will encounter the source of our being. Each of us has our own eyeless guide, whether we perceive it as an external figure or as an aspect of our higher self, leading us through territories we could not navigate alone. And each of us will face the choice the protagonist faced, to dissolve completely into the vastness we encounter, or to maintain individual identity and return to share what we have learned. Both choices are valid. Both are necessary. Some consciousnesses are meant to merge and not return, becoming permanent parts of the greater whole. Others are meant to bridge, to move back and forth between the depths and the surface, serving as messengers and teachers. The story of ETIDORHPA asks us to consider which role we are called to play. Are there? The moment when the first cell divided, when life discovered the trick of reproduction and began its explosive diversification. There, the moment when photosynthesis evolved, when life learned to capture sunlight and transform it into chemical energy, forever changing the planet's atmosphere. There, the extinction events, the near-deaths of all complex life, and the resilient resurgence that followed each catastrophe. He sees human history too, compressed into moments of significance. The discovery of fire, the invention of agriculture, the founding of the first cities, the development of writing, the Industrial Revolution, and beyond, into futures that may or may not come to pass depending on choices not yet made. At last, they emerge from the central shaft back into the city of the Eyeless. The inhabitants are gathered as if they have been waiting, though whether they waited for minutes or months, the protagonist cannot tell. One of the eyeless ones approaches him, tilts their head in that characteristic way, as if reading something in him that is not visible to ordinary perception. You have returned. This is good. Not all do. The center calls strongly, and many who experience union with ETIDORHPA choose to remain dissolved in her consciousness rather than return to individual form. But you have chosen return, which means you have accepted the burden of incarnation, the responsibility of bringing the mysteries back to the surface. The protagonist wants to collapse, to rest, to process what he has experienced. But the eyeless ones have prepared a ceremony, and he understands that he must participate. This is part of the tradition, part of the endless cycle of descent and return that maintains the connection between the surface and the interior. They lead him to a chamber he has not seen before, a space that seems to exist outside normal geometry. Its walls curve in impossible ways, and symbols cover every surface, symbols that now make sense to him in ways they did not before. He can read them, or rather, he can perceive the meanings they encode directly, without needing to translate them into language. The eyeless ones arrange themselves in a circle around him, and they begin to sing, if singing is the right word for the complex harmonic patterns they produce. The sound is not just audio but something deeper, vibrations that resonate with the fundamental structure of reality, that invoke forces and principles beyond the physical. As they sing, the protagonist feels the experience at the center being integrated into his being. It is being encoded in his cells, his neurons, his very atoms, so that even if his conscious memory fades, even if he can never adequately describe what happened, the knowledge will remain with him, accessible on levels below ordinary awareness. The ceremony lasts for what feels like hours, and by the end of it, the protagonist feels fundamentally different. He is no longer the man who descended, but neither is he the dissolved consciousness that merged with ETIDORHPA. He is something in between, a bridge between the surface and the depths, between the individual and the universal. When the ceremony concludes, the eyeless ones provide him with food and a place to rest. He sleeps, and his dreams are strange amalgamations of the ordinary and the transcendent, scenes from his surface life mixed with visions of planetary consciousness, memories that are both his and not his. He wakes to find the guide waiting for him. We must continue the ascent. The longer you remain at this depth, the harder it will be to return to the surface. Already your body is so refined, so adapted to the interior, that returning to the dense air and heavy gravity of the surface world will be painful. We must go now, while you still can. They say farewell to the city of the eyeless. The inhabitants gather to see them off, and several touch the protagonist gently, transferring what feels like blessings or perhaps protection, energy that will help him survive the return journey. And then they enter the passages leading upward, beginning the long climb back toward the surface world. The way is familiar now, but everything looks different with his transformed perception. The organic tunnels he passed through on the descent are clearly alive. He can see now, part of a vast organism that extends throughout the Earth's crust. The crystalline formations that amazed him before he now understands as computational structures, processing the informational flows that coordinate planetary processes. They reach the chamber with the energy node, the crystalline structure floating in the center. It glows as before, but now the protagonist can see the currents of force flowing through it, can perceive how it functions as a transformer, converting raw energies into forms that can sustain life and consciousness. "May I touch it?" he asks the guide. "If you wish, though be careful. It carries tremendous power." The protagonist approaches the floating crystal and reaches out tentatively. When his finger makes contact with its faceted surface, energy floods through him, and for a moment he is connected again to the planetary network, feeling all the nodes and their interconnections, sensing the vast pattern they create. He sees that the nodes are arranged not randomly but according to sacred geometry, following patterns that have meaning beyond mere function. They form a icosahedron, or perhaps a more complex polyhedron with more faces than three-dimensional space should allow. The pattern itself has power, generates effects that go beyond what the individual nodes could produce separately. He withdraws his hand, and the connection fades, leaving him breathless and slightly dizzy. The guide steadies him. The nodes call to those who have been to the center. Many have been tempted to remain near a node, basking in its energy, forgetting the surface world entirely. Do not linger here. They continue upward, through the abandoned city with its organic architecture. The murals on the temple walls seem even sadder now that the protagonist understands what they depict. A civilization that knew ETIDORHPA intimately, that built its entire culture around service to the planetary consciousness, and that ultimately transformed so completely that it could no longer maintain individual identity. That is the danger of the interior, he realizes. It is so easy to let go of the self, to dissolve into the vastness. Those who descend must have a reason to return, some anchor that keeps them tethered to individual existence. For him, that anchor is the obligation to share what he has learned, to serve as a messenger between the depths and the surface. They reach the shores of the vast underground ocean. Their boat is where they left it, or perhaps it is a different boat, impossible to tell. They launch it onto the dark waters and begin to paddle, following currents that the guide perceives but the protagonist cannot. The journey across the ocean is longer this time, or perhaps it just feels longer. The protagonist's mind keeps drifting back to the center, reliving the communion, trying to grasp details that slip away like water through his fingers. He knows that the more time passes, the more the memory will fade, not because it is forgotten but because there are no adequate structures in the human brain to store such experiences. They are too vast, too all-encompassing. They pass through the region where the water glows with bioluminescent organisms, and the protagonist trails his hand in the living light as he did before. But this time he perceives the organisms not just as beautiful phenomena but as individual expressions of consciousness, each one a point of awareness experiencing existence in its own unique way. The Leviathan appears again, or perhaps a different Leviathan, rising from the depths to feed on the glowing plankton. The protagonist watches it with new understanding. This creature, so enormous and so strange, has its own form of consciousness, experiences its own form of joy in feeding, in swimming through the dark waters, in existing in this lightless world. Everything is conscious, he understands more deeply now. Everything participates in the vast awareness that is ETIDORHPA, that is the earth, that is ultimately the universe itself. There are no dead things, no mere mechanisms. All is alive, all is aware, all is participating in the grand experiment of existence. They reach the far shore and continue upward through passages that grow gradually narrower, colder, less refined. They are approaching the surface world, returning to the realm of dense matter and limited consciousness. The protagonist's body begins to feel heavy again. The weightless grace he enjoyed in the deep places is fading. His muscles ache, his bones feel the pull of increasing gravity. His refined body, adapted to the subtle energies of the interior, is struggling with the crude physical forces of the shallow depths. They pass through the fungal forest, but many of the giant fungi are different from the ones they saw on the descent. New generations have grown, old ones have collapsed and been recycled by the ecosystem. Time has passed, perhaps months or even years, though the protagonist's subjective experience spans only weeks. The guide confirms this. Time flows differently at different depths. We have been gone from the surface world for more than a year. Those you knew may have forgotten you, may believe you dead. A year. The protagonist tries to grasp this, tries to imagine what has happened on the surface in his absence. Who has died? Who has been born? What events have unfolded in the world above while he journeyed through the world below? They reach the glowing lake they crossed on the descent, but the guide leads them around it rather than across it. There are passages he did not show on the way down, shortcuts available to those ascending who would be dangerous for those descending. And then they reach the region where the protagonist's eyes begin to hurt, a burning sensation that grows more intense with each step upward. The guide explains that his physical eyes are beginning to regenerate, cells dividing and differentiating, reconstructing the organs that dissolved in the pool of purification. The pain is intense, and the protagonist must stop frequently to let it subside. The guide is patient, understanding that this is a necessary part of the transition. By the time they reach the upper passages, the protagonist has physical eyes again, though they feel strange, oversensitive, as if they must relearn how to process light. They pass through the labyrinth with its ancient inscriptions. The protagonist can still read some of the symbols, though their meanings are already becoming less clear as his consciousness contracts back toward normal human parameters. He mourns this loss even as he accepts its necessity. To remain at the expanded level of consciousness he achieved at the center would make it impossible to function in ordinary human society. At last, they reach the organic passages near the surface, the tunnels that feel like the interior of a living being. The protagonist's body is heavy now, exhausted from fighting against increasing gravity. Every step is an effort. His refined physiology, so well adapted to the deep places, is poorly suited to surface conditions. And then, finally, they reach the entrance through which they first descended, the hidden passage in the region of Mammoth Cave. The guide stops at the threshold between the interior darkness and the faint light filtering down from above. "This is as far as I go," the guide says. "I cannot survive on the surface for long. The light would blind me, the dense air would choke me, the crude vibrations would overwhelm my senses. You must make this final ascent alone." The protagonist feels a surge of panic. The guide has been his constant companion, his teacher, his anchor through the entire journey. How can he face the surface world without him? "You are ready," the guide says firmly. "You have been prepared. Everything you need to know is within you now, encoded in your cells, written in your bones. Trust in what you have become." The guide reaches out and embraces him, and the protagonist feels energy flowing from the Eyeless One into him, a final gift of strength for the journey ahead. "Go," the guide says, releasing him. "Return to the surface. Share what you can of what you have learned. Become a bridge between the worlds. This is your purpose now, your destiny. And remember, you are never truly alone. ETIDORHPA is always with you, for she is the ground of your being, the space in which you exist. You cannot be separated from her, no matter how far you travel or how deeply you forget." The protagonist turns toward the passage leading upward, toward the faint light of the surface world. His transformed eyes can barely tolerate even this dim illumination, and he must shield them with his hand as he begins to climb. Behind him, he hears the guide's musical voice one last time. "Go with love. Go with truth. Go with the blessing of the deep places. And if you can, return someday. The interior is always here, always waiting for those brave enough to descend." The protagonist climbs. The passage is steep and difficult, and his heavy body struggles with every step. But he perseveres, driven by a determination he did not know he possessed. He has come too far, experienced too much, to fail at this final stage. The light grows brighter, more painful. He must squint against it, his newly regenerated eyes protesting this assault of photons. He can smell the surface now, the scent of soil and growing things, so different from the mineral smells of the interior. And then he emerges into open air, into actual daylight, and it is like being born again. The sun's brightness is overwhelming, unbearable. He collapses on the ground, his eyes streaming tears, his body shaking from the transition between the worlds. He lies there for long minutes, maybe hours, letting his body adjust. Gradually, the pain fades. His eyes adapt to the light, learning once more to process the narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum that humans call the visible range. His lungs adjust to the thin surface air. His muscles remember how to work under full gravity. Finally, he sits up and looks around. He is somewhere in the Kentucky wilderness, surrounded by trees and birdsong. The world seems almost unbearably beautiful in its simplicity, in its ordinary physical reality. After the wonders of the interior, the surface world should seem dull, but instead it glows with a secret radiance, and he understands that this is because he can now perceive the life force flowing through everything, the consciousness that animates all beings. A squirrel chatters at him from a nearby branch, and he smiles, recognizing a fellow expression of the universal consciousness. A breeze rustles the leaves, and he hears in it the whisper of ETIDORHPA, reminding him that she is everywhere, not just at the planetary center but present in every atom, every moment. He stands on shaking legs and begins to walk, making his way toward civilization, toward human society, toward the life he left behind more than a year ago. He does not know what he will find there, does not know how he will explain his absence, does not know how he can possibly share what he has learned. But he knows he must try. This is his burden and his gift, to be a messenger from the deep places, to plant seeds of the mysteries in the minds of those ready to receive them. Not everyone will understand. Most will dismiss his story as fantasy or madness. But some will recognize the truth in his words, will feel the call of the interior, will begin their own journeys toward the center. As the 7th hour draws to a close, the protagonist emerges from the forest and sees in the distance a road, a farmhouse, signs of human civilization. He takes a deep breath of the surface air, so thin and insubstantial compared to the rich atmosphere of the interior, and walks toward the human world, carrying within him secrets that will haunt and inspire him for the rest of his days. Chapter 12. The Return to the Surface, Lloyd's Gift to the World. We return now to where we began. John Uri Lloyd's study in Cincinnati, the manuscript on his desk, the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Lloyd understood what he held in his hands. This was not merely a curious tale or an entertaining fiction. It was a transmission of genuine esoteric knowledge, a roadmap to states of consciousness that most humans never experience, a challenge to the materialistic worldview that dominated late 19th century science. The question Lloyd faced was how to present this material to the world. If he published it as truth, as a genuine account of a real journey, it would be dismissed immediately by the scientific establishment. No respected publisher would touch it. It would be relegated to the lunatic fringe, read only by conspiracy theorists and hollow earth enthusiasts. But if he presented it as fiction, as a novel of imagination, it might reach a wider audience. Readers would engage with it as entertainment, lowering their defenses, allowing the ideas to seep in without the resistance that claims of literal truth would provoke. The teachings could be smuggled into consciousness disguised as fantasy. Lloyd made his choice. He would publish it as a novel, attributed to an anonymous author, edited and prepared for publication by himself. He would add illustrations to make the journey vivid and memorable. He would write a frame narrative that preserved ambiguity about the text's status, allowing readers to take it as literally or metaphorically as they chose. This decision was itself a teaching, a demonstration of the principle that truth often travels best when veiled, that the direct approach is not always the most effective approach, that sometimes we must speak slant, as the poet Emily Dickinson advised, telling the truth but telling it slant. Lloyd worked on the book for years, commissioning illustrations from artists who could visualize the scenes described in the manuscript. These images would prove crucial to the book's impact, making the abstract concrete, giving readers visual anchors for the journey. The illustration of the Eyeless guide became iconic, disturbing and fascinating in equal measure. The image captured perfectly the uncanny quality of a human evolved beyond need for eyes, adapted to darkness, existing at the boundary between the familiar and the alien. The images of the fungal forests, the underground ocean, the city of the Eyeless, all of these helped readers visualize what the protagonist had experienced, made the journey feel real in ways that words alone could not achieve. Lloyd also added his own commentary, footnotes and annotations that provided scientific context, that explained how certain descriptions might align with or challenge contemporary knowledge. These additions served multiple purposes. They demonstrated Lloyd's scientific credibility, they provided cover for the book's more radical claims, and they invited readers to think critically about the relationship between science and mysticism. When ETIDORHPA was finally published in 1895, Lloyd watched nervously to see how it would be received. Would readers recognize the truth embedded in the fantasy? Would the book find its intended audience? Or would it sink without a trace, just another curious volume in a publishing landscape crowded with strange and wonderful works? To his relief and amazement, The book found immediate success. It sold well from the beginning, and sales continued strong for years. Readers were captivated by the journey, by the vivid descriptions, by the philosophical depth, by the audacious reimagining of the Earth's interior. Reviews were mixed but mostly positive. Literary critics praised the book's imagination and prose. Scientists criticized its physics while acknowledging the power of its vision. Esoteric readers recognized immediately what they held, and the book became required reading in mystical circles. Lloyd found himself in the curious position of being celebrated for a book he insisted he did not write, merely edited. People wanted to know more about the anonymous author. Who was he? Was the story true? Could Lloyd reveal his identity? Lloyd maintained his position consistently. The author wished to remain anonymous. The manuscript had come to him through a mysterious intermediary. He could not say definitively whether the events described were literally true or allegorical. Readers must decide for themselves. This ambiguity proved perfect for the book's purposes. It allowed different readers to engage with the text at different levels. Those seeking adventure fiction could read it as such. Those seeking philosophical wisdom could find that. Those seeking mystical revelation could discover it hidden in the pages. Lloyd gave occasional lectures about the book, always carefully maintaining the ambiguity about its nature. He would describe the process of preparing it for publication, discuss the challenges of editing such unusual material, explain the scientific concepts referenced in the text. But he would never definitively say whether he believed the journey actually occurred. This restraint was itself a teaching. Lloyd understood that belief is not the point. Whether the journey was physically real or symbolically real matters less than what the journey teaches, what transformation it catalyzes in the reader. The question, did this really happen, is less important than, what does this mean? What can I learn from it? How does it change me? As years passed and the book continued to sell, Lloyd saw how it was being used and interpreted by various communities. He saw it embraced by Hollow Earth theorists as evidence for their claims, and while he was somewhat amused by this literal interpretation, he did not discourage it. If taking the book literally helped certain readers engage with its deeper truths, who was he to say they were wrong? He saw it adopted by mystical orders as a teaching text, and this pleased him, for this was closer to the book's true purpose. He corresponded with leaders of various esoteric organizations, sharing insights about the manuscript's symbolism, helping them understand how to use it effectively in their training programs. He saw it inspire writers and artists, saw its influence rippling through culture in unexpected ways. And he understood that this was how genuine wisdom propagates, not through direct transmission from teacher to student, but through creative works that inspire and catalyze, that plant seeds in consciousness that may not sprout for years or decades. Lloyd lived to see ETIDORHPA become a minor classic, a book that never achieved mainstream prominence but that maintained a steady readership, that kept being rediscovered by new generations, that refused to disappear despite the passage of time. He died in 1936, having spent the last 4 decades of his life known as the editor of ETIDORHPA as much as for his legitimate scientific accomplishments in pharmacy and chemistry. His obituaries mentioned both aspects of his career, recognizing that he had successfully bridged the worlds of science and mysticism, rationality and imagination. After Lloyd's death, researchers went through his papers hoping to find more information about the manuscript's origins, about the mysterious author, about whether Lloyd himself had made any journeys into the interior. They found little definitive, only hints and suggestions, carefully preserved ambiguities that Lloyd had maintained even in his private papers. Some researchers concluded that Lloyd himself was the author, that the entire frame narrative about receiving the manuscript from the man was itself fiction, that Lloyd had invented the story whole cloth. Others maintained that the manuscript was genuine, that Lloyd truly had served only as editor, that somewhere in history a real person had made this real journey. The truth, as is so often the case with matters esoteric, probably lies somewhere between these extremes. Perhaps Lloyd received a genuine manuscript but elaborated on it significantly. Perhaps he drew on his own mystical experiences while shaping another person's account. Perhaps the manuscript was a collaborative creation, passed through multiple hands and minds before reaching its final form. Or perhaps, from a deeper perspective, questions of authorship are meaningless. The book emerged from the collective unconscious, from that deep well of archetypes and symbols that all humans share. Lloyd served as its channel, its midwife, but the book itself came from somewhere beyond individual authorship, from the same source that all genuine wisdom comes from. What we can say with certainty is that Lloyd's decision to publish the manuscript, his careful preparation and presentation of it, his willingness to be associated with such unusual material despite his scientific reputation, all of these represent a tremendous gift to humanity. He could have kept the manuscript private, could have locked it away as too strange or too controversial. He could have dismissed it as fantasy and destroyed it. He could have published it under a pseudonym to protect his reputation. Instead, he took responsibility for bringing it into the world, knowing it would attract both praise and ridicule, knowing it would complicate his legacy, knowing he would spend the rest of his life explaining and defending a book he claimed not to have written. This act of courage and service ensured that the teachings contained in ETIDORHPA would be preserved and transmitted, that future generations would have access to this map of the interior territories, that seekers in ages to come would find guidance for their own journeys into the depths. And the book continues to serve this purpose today, more than a century after its publication. New readers continue to discover it, continue to be transformed by it, continue to recognize in its pages a truth that speaks to something deep within them. Some read it and are inspired to undertake their own literal explorations, to enter caves and wilderness areas, to push their physical limits, to discover what lies beyond the boundaries of civilized comfort. These readers often return with stories of their own, tales of encounters with the strange and wonderful, experiences that parallel in uncanny ways what the protagonist describes. Others read it and embark on metaphorical journeys, using meditation or psychedelics or intensive psychological work to descend into their own depths. They report experiences that mirror the protagonists, the encounter with guides, the dissolution of ego, the expansion of consciousness, the communion with something vast and sacred at the center of being. And still others read it and simply allow it to work on them subtly, to plant seeds that may not germinate for years, to shift their understanding in ways they cannot fully articulate, to open doors in consciousness that they did not know existed. All of these responses are valid, all are what the book intends. ETIDORHPA is not prescriptive. It does not tell readers what they must do or believe. It simply offers an account, a story, a possibility, and invites readers to find their own way to the truths it points toward. As our 12-hour journey through the story of ETIDORHPA comes to a close, we find ourselves back on the surface, back in the ordinary world, but carrying with us the memory of the depths. We have descended with the protagonist through layers of rock and layers of reality, have witnessed his transformation and his communion with the source, have followed him back to the surface and seen how he integrated what he learned. We have seen how the manuscript traveled through time, finding guardians and eventually finding Lloyd, who gave it permanent form as a book. We have seen how the book has influenced culture, inspired seekers, catalyzed transformations across more than a century. And we recognize now that we ourselves have been on a journey. These 12 hours of listening have been their own descent, their own exploration of the interior territories. We may not have physically traveled to the center of the earth, but we have traveled to the center of the story, have encountered its core truths, have been changed by the encounter. The journey, as ETIDORHPA teaches, is never truly complete. There is always deeper to go, always more to understand, always further transformations to undergo. The center we reach today becomes tomorrow's starting point. The revelations we receive open onto new mysteries. The questions we answer give birth to new questions. But we are not the same as when we began. Something has shifted, some door has opened, some seed has been planted. We carry now within us the knowledge that there are depths beneath the surface, that reality is stranger and more wonderful than conventional understanding allows, that the journey inward is always available for those brave enough to undertake it. ETIDORHPA calls to us still, as it has called to readers for over a century, as it will continue to call to readers in centuries to come. The invitation remains open: descend, explore, transform, return and share what you have learned. Become a bridge between the worlds. Serve the eternal work of consciousness awakening to itself. The interior waits, patient and eternal. ETIDORHPA dwells at the center, welcoming all who descend, offering her wisdom to all who open themselves to receive it. The Eyeless guides stand ready to lead those who dare to venture beyond the lighted world into the sacred darkness where truth dwells. The journey is yours to take, if you choose. The path is marked. The destination is certain. And the rewards, though they cannot be described in words, are beyond all imagining. The story of ETIDORHPA ends where it began, with an invitation to journey, with a promise of transformation, with the assurance that you are never alone in the depths, that guides and guardians are always present, that the Source welcomes all who seek it with sincere hearts. May your journey be blessed. May you find what you seek. May you return with wisdom to share. And may the light you carry from the depths illuminate the surface world, making it more beautiful, more true, more aligned with the divine patterns that underlie all existence. This is the end of our exploration of ETIDORHPA, but it is only the beginning of your own journey, should you choose to accept the call. The book waits for you, as it has waited for countless others. The interior waits. ETIDORHPA waits. Will you descend? As our story draws to a close, we leave the protagonist in his adopted role as teacher and guide, living his quiet life on the surface while carrying always within him the memory of the center, the knowledge of ETIDORHPA, the understanding that reality is far stranger and more wonderful than most humans ever suspect. His individual story becomes part of the larger story of humanity's ongoing journey toward awakening, one small thread in the vast tapestry of consciousness exploring itself through countless forms and countless lives. The story of ETIDORHPA asks us to consider which role we are called to play. Are we explorers venturing into unknown territory and choosing to remain there? Or are we scouts who explore and return with maps for others? Or are we teachers who guide others on journeys we have already taken? There is no single correct answer. Each soul must find its own path, respond to its own calling. But the story reminds us that whichever path we choose, the journey itself is inevitable. We will all eventually descend into the depths, whether we do so consciously during life or unconsciously at death. We will all eventually face what lies at our center, encounter the ground of being from which we emerge and to which we return. ETIDORHPA teaches that we can choose to make this journey consciously, with preparation and guidance, or we can be dragged into it by circumstance, unprepared and unguided. The former path offers the possibility of returning with understanding, of integrating what we learn, of using our experience to help others. The latter path may lead to dissolution or madness, to experiences that traumatize rather than transform. As the modern world grows increasingly complex and chaotic, as surface life becomes more fragmented and alienating, more people are feeling the call to descend, to seek something deeper and more real than the artificial constructs of contemporary society. They may not articulate this calling in terms of hollow earth or planetary consciousness, but they feel it nonetheless. A hunger for authentic experience, for direct encounter with truth, for connection to something vast and meaningful. For these seekers, ETIDORHPA remains a valuable guidebook, a map of territories they will traverse on their own journeys. The specific geography may differ, the symbols and metaphors may shift to match their own cultural contexts, but the essential pattern remains the same. Some find their interior through meditation, sitting in silence until the chatter of ordinary minds subsides and deeper levels of awareness emerge. They descend through layers of thought and emotion, through the subconscious and unconscious, toward the silent center where pure awareness rests. Others find it through psychedelics, using plant medicines or synthetic compounds to temporarily dissolve the boundaries of ego and experience the interconnection of all things. Their journeys may be briefer than the protagonist's year-long descent, compressed into hours rather than months, but the territory they explore is fundamentally the same. Still others find it through art or creativity, losing themselves in the flow of creative work until they tap into sources of inspiration that feel like they come from beyond the individual mind. They descend into the creative unconscious, that realm where archetypes dwell and from which all genuine art emerges. And some find it through suffering, through the dark nights of the soul that strip away illusions and force confrontation with existential realities that comfortable surface life allows us to ignore. Depression, grief, trauma, illness, all of these can serve as involuntary initiations, descents into the interior that we would never choose but that nonetheless transform us if we survive them. ETIDORHPA honors all these paths, recognizing that there are many routes to the center, many ways to encounter the mysteries. The physical descent through caves is one way, but it is not the only way, perhaps not even the most important way. What matters is not the specific method but the willingness to journey, to leave behind the safe and familiar, to venture into the unknown in search of truth. The book also addresses a question that troubles many spiritual seekers: how to live in the ordinary world after experiencing the extraordinary. How to function in society after glimpsing the illusory nature of consensus reality. How to engage in mundane activities when you know they are ultimately meaningless from the perspective of eternity. The protagonist struggles with these questions upon his return, and the book does not offer easy answers. It acknowledges the difficulty of reintegration, the loneliness of carrying knowledge that others cannot understand, the temptation to withdraw from the world entirely. But it also suggests that this very difficulty is the point. The journey is not meant to provide escape from the world, but to transform how we engage with the world. We return not to resume our old lives as if nothing happened, but to bring the light of deeper understanding into surface existence, to live as bridges between the worlds. This requires a delicate balance. We must be in the world but not of it, must participate in ordinary activities while maintaining awareness of their deeper significance, must speak the language of surface dwellers while remembering the musical tongue of the interior. It is a challenging path, and not everyone who descends is able to walk it successfully. Some get lost in the depths and never fully return. Others return but cannot integrate what they learned, becoming fragmented, living half in one world and half in another, belonging fully to neither. But those who succeed in maintaining the balance become sources of light in the world, presences that remind others of the depths they have forgotten, teachers who can guide without preaching, healers who work not through technique but through being. The protagonist became such a presence, and his story invites us to become such presences ourselves. Not by imitating his specific journey but by undertaking our own journeys with the same courage and commitment, by being willing to die to our old selves and be reborn as something new, by serving as conduits through which the wisdom of the depths can flow into the world of surfaces. As the 11th chapter draws to a close, we recognize that the story of ETIDORHPA has no ending, not really. It is a continuous cycle, an eternal return, a pattern that repeats forever with variations. The protagonist's journey is our journey, is humanity's journey, is consciousness exploring itself through endless forms and endless experiences. The center is always there, always waiting, always calling those who have ears to hear. ETIDORHPA dwells in the depths, patient and eternal, welcoming all who descend, sharing her wisdom with all who open themselves to receive it. And the journey continues, life after life, age after age, as consciousness spirals ever deeper into understanding of its own nature. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed listening to this story.